Maryland.
Sorry.
So I wanted to, and Jack, what did you say? Whatever you like, dear, or something like that. I wanted to talk about these holidays in terms of practice, how we actually experience them and work with them in our meditation practice. So looking at it from that angle, my family's Jewish. We celebrate Passover. I didn't really know very much about Easter, although as okay, yeah. As a young woman, I loved the Russian Orthodox Church, probably because I was studying Russian, and I would love to go on Easter. They would have a midnight mass, and they had incense, which we didn't have in the 50s or early 60s in our Jewish household. They had these big censers of incense, and they would chant Christos Voskresenia, which means Christ is risen. And the priest would go down the aisle with the incense censer swinging, and I just felt this was so mysterious and beautiful. And I loved it, and I wish for our world that we could enjoy each other's traditions, just for, it was a little superficial loving it for the incense and the chanting and the atmosphere of the church, but I was 15, it's okay. We grow up and appreciate other things as we grow up, but just the idea that we could really appreciate each other's holidays, and because all the traditions have something beautiful to offer to us. And so for the meaning of Passover, in terms of just being very experience near, make a tight fist, one of them, it doesn't have to be both, and just hold it as tight as you can, like really tight. And then notice how it starts to get a little uncomfortable if you really hold it tight, right? The knuckles start to ache a little bit, and depending on the length of your nails, they might be digging into your palms a little bit, and mine are really short, but they're still digging. And then just stay with that for a moment. And for the new people, we don't usually teach techniques of self-mutilation in this class. This is just an example of something which it's in the interests of. So now that it's really uncomfortable, just let that fist relax and see how it feels when you just let it relax. And then the fingers might be a little bit cramped over, but then you can feel the blood, the warmth of the blood, right, rushing into the hand. And then when you move your fingers, it feels better, doesn't it, to move your fingers? And so in the simplest way, this is the meaning of Passover, that we move from a very tight, constricted, uncomfortable place into opening into a place where we feel caught or stuck or even imprisoned, to a place where we feel more freedom, more openness, more movement. And I didn't find a way to encapsulate Easter into quite that simple experience. But if we just take one mindful breath in and one mindful breath out, it's not like we have to close our eyes, but sometimes it helps to feel the sensation to close our eyes. And then what happens after we take that one mindful breath in and that one mindful breath out, another breath comes, right, and takes its place, luckily, right away. And this is the process that repeats over and over, and we think of it as a different breath coming to be born after that other breath, the previous breath, passes away and fades away. Whether it's a different breath or some of each, or I don't know, but the point that we can notice is that being born, the moment of a new breath arising, whether it's an in-breath or an out-breath, a new breath is born, and to me that can really symbolize this idea of resurrection that we associate with Easter. And we can experience it symbolically, this being born and dying, and then something is reborn, born again in the next moment. And I found a poem that I want to read to you. Some of you might know it. It's called Easter Morning in Wales, and it's by David White. A garden inside me unknown, secret, neglected for years. The layers of its soil deep and thick. Trees in the corner with branching arms, and the tangled briars like broken nets. Sunrise through the misted orchard, morning sun turns silver on the pointed twigs. I have woken from the sleep of ages, and I'm not sure if I'm really seeing or dreaming, or simply astonished, walking toward sunrise, to have stumbled into the garden where the stone was rolled from the tomb of longing. And I love this poem because it actually offers a way to understand in our own experience that feeling of freedom, of release, of having that stone rolled away from the tomb of longing, from whatever tight or constricted place that we might find ourselves in. And we do regularly find ourselves in a place like that. And, you know, we celebrate with the Jews in Egypt and their flight from being enslaved, but we can think of the enslaved people from Africa who were brought to this country. We can think of the masses and masses of incarcerated people, this nightmare of our country that we somehow find a way to ignore. Or we think of enslaving people as something from the past, but actually there are people who are enslaved right here in this city, in our city, people who are working without wages, whose passports have been taken away, people who are really imprisoned. And okay, those are external forms of imprisonment, and for our practice we look more at the internal forms of the ways that we imprison ourselves. And we look at it from our own experience of the transformation of those moments. And we've all had that experience of having been completely caught in something painful and then being released from that, either through our own practice, our own therapy, or changing circumstances of life, or the passage of time, released from the loss, grieving the loss of somebody we love. And then I was thinking, the tomb of longing, like, how do I see the tomb of longing? How do you see it in your own experience? You know, what does that mean to you? And I thought, well, usually the tomb of longing, I feel sort of trapped in there at moments when I'm vulnerable, like hungry. What is it? Hungry, lonely, angry, tired in program. You know, those moments when we're vulnerable and we wish for our life to be different from the way it is. And when that longing comes, it is a kind of tomb because it deadens our psyche, and it also numbs us to the good things that may actually be around us. Wait, I have a poem about that. This is a poem called Abundance, and it's written by a poet named Amy Schmidt, and she wrote this poem in honor of Mary Oliver, because she said Mary Oliver wrote as one who noticed. She missed nothing. No detail was too minute to be seen and studied and loved. And through her poems, she convinced me that we as poets and humans can't afford to be anything other than wide awake, willing to see everything and give thanks. So here's her poem. It's called Abundance. It's impossible to be lonely when you're zesting an orange. Scrape the soft rind once, and the whole room fills with fruit. Look around. You have more than enough. Always have, you just didn't notice until now. So the tomb of longing, this narrow, constricted place of whatever our own pain may be, there's lots of forms of physical and mental agony that we go through in this life that tightens our experience and tightens our reactions to it. So how do we free our hearts? And that's what we're here to do with our meditation practice and our mindfulness practice in our everyday lives. It's to free our hearts so that we can notice, so that we can look around, so that we can see what needs to be done with the people we love, with the earth that we love. There is so much work to do in so many realms of experience right here, right now. And when that stone is rolled away and we're free from that tomb, we begin to see it, and we see the support that is around us that we might not have noticed before. When I studied Zen, we talked about our gratitude for the floor that holds us up, and our cushions, and the walls that are a kindness because they protect us. They give us an experience of protection and seclusion so that we can be someplace and be less distracted. We can come here and actually focus on being with ourselves in a way that's really hard when we're busy, and we just need to slow into experience so we can be grateful for the space, the walls, the floor, the ground. It holds us up, we're rooted. And when we're practicing mindfulness, we can see the things that we take for granted and how they support our life, and how, like in the poem, we're really not ever alone in this way. And we can see that we have to take care of our earth, and we know this always, and some cultures have kept this, in the front of their practices, indigenous cultures especially. But with the urgency of climate change, we all know it now. We all know this. It's hard to have equanimity sometimes when our phones misbehave at the wrong moment. Somebody had an alarm that went off about maybe 10 minutes before the end of the sitting, and I thought, wishful thinking. It's not over yet. But as we see with the breath being born, the breath vanishing, each breath being replaced by another. We had a beautiful day long yesterday in San Gabriel Valley. Jasmine was there and was actually our retreat manager. And and we were talking about loneliness and connection and community and meditating, practicing and listening to teachings about this too. And somebody said, I get scared sometimes because I feel like I could just die and maybe nobody would even notice. And after a while, nobody would even remember. And she was just talking about that it felt frightening, the idea of just vanishing, and with a few traces, but not a ton of traces. And no matter how many traces you leave, they too eventually dissolve and vanish. And yet, when we can be with the vanishing of a breath, the place where the out-breath just dissolves into space, and if we can be with that moment of vanishing or dissolving, the moment when things end, it actually helps us be peaceful about this whole thing ending, actually. I mean, we'll always have fears associated with the unknown, and we don't know what happens after we die, and we don't know that we're going to resurrect. And I read about, well, I don't think I'm going to go there, I'm sorry. That's because I realized Jack probably wants to say stuff too. Anyway, I like this poem of David White because when he talks about that garden inside himself, unknown and neglected, this is what it's like when we don't even have a handshaking acquaintance with our inner life. It's like a beautiful garden, unknown, neglected for years. It might as well be a secret garden, the soil thick, the roots and branches all tangled. And that's what it feels like so often when we sit down with ourselves to meditate, right? It's like, I don't know, I feel like I need a machete sometimes. It can be very thick and very tangled, and there's so much fear of what lies in our own hearts. We're actually afraid that, we're going to disentangle or clear a space, and what we'll discover is maybe a monster instead of a Buddha nature. Maybe we'll discover something that we don't even want to see. And I think one of the hugest blessings, the greatest liberations of this practice is to see that really all that's there is our fear of what's there. The rest is very workable, it's very peaceful, and it's called the lion's roar of the Dharma. What happens when creatures hear a lion roar? What happens? What do? They run away, they hide. Yes. And the lion walks with confidence. And so that image of the lion's roar of the Dharma, of these practices and teachings, is the image of having the confidence that when we walk with the lion's roar, with that kind of confidence, our fears will run away and hide. They will not matter. They will not be in charge of our life. It's meant to frighten away all that holds us back. Okay. I have to share this morning. Anyway, when we sit and we breathe and we notice the arising and passing away of experience of the breath, of a sound, of our life, moment by moment, as we do this, we just develop courage and we realize that our fears are not as big as all of who we are. Any emotion that troubles us is not all of who we are and is not as big of us. And as I was saying, when we make our bodies a bridge from the ground to the sky, this is the embodiment of that confidence and that perspective that gives us some perspective on the things that otherwise feel so imprisoning and stifling. That's what I want to share with you this morning.
Yes.
Your turn.
Thank you, dear. Happy Easter, happy Passover, happy spring, renewal. When you read the Buddhist texts, one of the most succinct and important statements in there, the Buddha says, I teach something very simple. Suffering, if you haven't noticed, look around, and the end of suffering. That's all that I teach. And all the practices and the trainings and the understandings are, as Trudy was talking about, finding ways to move from bondage, from that closed fist, to an open heart and an open mind, to move through this world of 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows with a peaceful and wise heart. And the breath, which you said we were going to talk about this morning, so I'll kind of carry on with that. Let's say a number of things about the breath. First of all, when somebody's in difficulty or trouble, you know how common it is now, maybe it's even unwelcome at certain moments, but you can say to somebody, breathe. And just the act of breathing in the middle of something difficult starts to loosen the bondage, starts to open us up in some significant way. And of course then it becomes more important in labor, if you're with or giving birth to a child, or with someone giving birth to a child, to be able to breathe. It becomes really important in hospice work. People breathe together with those, and at the end of life there's this beautiful book called Coma by Arnie Mindell, where he goes and breathes with people who've been in coma for a long time, making sounds that mimic their breath, and sometimes they wake up because somebody's finally met them there where they were. It's kind of remarkable stories. So our breath is that which opens us and which connects us. And the point isn't to become a good breather. You're already quite good at that. You're going to label us on that. But it's to use the breath to open us to the reality of life, to where you become present for your own body, for your own heart and mind, for that which is around you, for that person where you say breathe, or that, person in label, or whatever it happens to be. It's as if somehow, with the breath, allowing the breath, your sense of who you are gets bigger. The heart, the mind, the body open. Now, when I was training in various monasteries as a monk, one of the things one of my teachers would say is, tell me something new about the breath every day, and I'll talk to you for the next, come and see me over these next few months. So it was like, okay, this next couple months, 50 new things about the breath. That's an interesting thing. I mean, it's boring, right? What could it be? When it begins, when it ends, how much space is there, what the sensations are like in different parts of the body. And the point wasn't kind of to get a checklist and ace the exam, but it had the quality of becoming curious. What is this mysterious life we're in? And what is it like to become really present with this breath? What is a breath? And then you start to notice as you become more mindful or present, it breathes itself. And not only does it breathe itself, but your life breathes itself. You're not doing your life, baby. It's doing you, and it's taking you for quite a ride. But that's an enormous shift from being the one who's like driving, and thinking where you're looking at your MapQuest or whatever, to realizing that you are actually being lived, and the breath is being lived through you. And there's a kind of relaxation that comes with that, which gives you freedom and ability to move in new ways because you're not holding on to where you're going and where you're supposed to go, but you're actually in the experience of life being lived through you. Now, some of the things that happen as you begin to use your breath, and it becomes a beautiful gift and a tool. I think of a friend of mine who, went to Harvard Law School, was a very successful human rights lawyer working on the behalf of people with disabilities and mental illness and high-profile cases across the country. And he said, I couldn't do this work if I didn't have my breath. And he said, before I go into the courtroom, I sit and I use that breath to open myself and feel that I'm part of something bigger. So what helps? All kinds of things grow as you pay attention to breath. First of all, as you do, you can deliberately invite a sense of trust that your mindfulness and your breath continue in the midst of all things, that your heart and mind is big enough to hold the tears and the longing and the sorrows and the love, that the breath starts to teach you that you can live through all of this. Some people like to count the breath just because it helps them come back to stay this breath and this one. Some people find that counting the breath gets in the way. A deeper invitation is to invite a sense of ease with each breath. Breathing in, ease. Breathing out, calm. Or breathing in, I invite a sense of peace. And I don't mean it just with a kind of inner whisper, although Thich Nhat Hanh uses that. He has a little whisper. Breathing in with ease, breathing out with calm. You can do that. But more interestingly, as you feel your breath, you can start to sense those moments that come around it where there's a little bit of peace. in 2 breaths, or there's a little bit of well-being, or there's a little bit of that releasing of the fist and letting down, and you say, may this extend, may this grow, and you begin to allow your focus to not just be the breath, but the breath is the gateway. It's the sweet oil that eases the hinge into the garden that Trudy talked about. The breath becomes the gateway to finding in yourself a place of openness or trust or ease or joy. And again, Thich Nhat Hanh recommends that as you do the practice of breathing, you try putting that little half smile that you see on the statues of the Buddhas and so forth. Put a little half smile. It has, of course, a neurological and endocrinological effect. Turns out when you smile a little bit, it releases, endorphins and all kinds of things like that. But I don't think Thich Nhat Hanh was tuned into that as much as the actual experience of it. So there you are breathing, not to be a good breather, but to feel the mystery of the breath and then to make space to open the state of heart and mind to calm, to ease, to well-being, and to a kind of tenderness. Because the breath is really something, filmy and tender and at the same time absolutely critical. And then when hard things come, which they will in our lives inevitably, you have this resource of knowing that you can breathe with it, as somebody's saying to the woman in labor, perhaps the midwife, breathe with me. You can say, let me breathe through this. And it's not that the hard things aren't supposed to happen. They're part of actually what grows your trust in compassion, grows your trust in courage, grows your trust in being able to become the Buddha that you are. At MIT in the agricultural lab, where they're doing all kinds of very interesting experiments of trying to figure out what makes plants grow better, how do we change the soil, how do we change the environment, what do we do, in all kinds of geeky ways that only MIT can do. So one, I think his name is Francis Lam, who runs this lab, said, some students came in and they said, well, when we're trying to see what are the parameters that make plants grow well, how about if we play music for the plants? And you've heard these experiments. And he says, okay, what do you want to do? We want to play Mozart and see if our tomatoes or whatever we're trying to genetically modify, they grow better. And he said, okay, but you're scientists, you can't just play Mozart. You've got to play Mozart and you have to play Tupac, right? And see how the plants do. And it turns out, surprisingly or most interestingly, that the plants do considerably better with Tupac. And that's because they need the beat and they need the vibration. And it turns out that having a little bit of resistance is actually what strengthens the plants. In the same way, remember that dome that there was in Arizona, the Mars mission, where these folks were going to live inside for a year and try not to kill themselves, whatever they were doing. They came close. But anyway, they had a bunch of plants and trees in that dome, and they did not do well that year because there was no wind, there was no resistance. So the heart actually also grows through resistance, and your breath is the way to steady and trust. This is from Carl Fried Durkheim, Zen master. He says the person who's really on the way, when they fall upon hard times in the world, will not as a consequence turn to those friends who offer refuge and comfort and encourage their old self and their old way to survive. Rather, they'll seek out others who will faithfully and inexorably help them to risk themselves so that they may endure the difficulty and pass courageously through it. Only to the extent that a person exposes themselves over and over again to annihilation, letting go, and loss, can that which is indestructible be found within them. In this daring lies dignity in the spirit of true awakening. So when it gets difficult in your meditation, cool. You know, settle your seat, say, okay, now we've hit the real stuff that's going to teach this heart and mind how to breathe through and be present and trust that we can do this in a way. And then a renewal will start to come. A deeper sense of well-being will grow. And your connection with what this breath is and how it's the mirror of the changing of life being reborn again and again will show itself. There you are, and you're restless and you're doubting and your fears and your plans. All right, now this is the time to practice. It's not the time to stop. So, one last thing to say. And sort of picking up on the thread Trudy said about climate change. I saw an image online, maybe some of you have seen it, of the earth breathing. And it was a time-lapse photograph of the earth from space that was taken over the course of a year or several years, all condensed. So you watch the changing of the seasons. And the way that changing of the seasons happen with the tilt of the Earth's axis and all the stuff that we know is that in the summer in the northern hemisphere, the Arctic ice starts to shrink. And there's more of the Arctic Sea now. It's really problematic because it's happening from global warming so much. And the ice around Antarctica grows more, and you can see the snow-capped mountains grow more in the south. And then in the next half of the year, you see the Arctic ice grow and the ice in the south diminish. And from space, it's visible. And what was done in this time-lapse image was to show the Earth in its seasons in about the length of a breath. So this is a year-long breath the Earth is taking. And in the background was the of the sound of a breath, and you'd watch in one breath, you know, the Arctic ice would grow and the Antarctic ice would diminish, and then it would change, and that ice would melt, and this would grow here, and you could really watch the planet Earth as if it was breathing, just taking year-long breaths, which for the Earth is a piece of cake, you know, after millions of years. It was something very, very powerful about it. And when you read the teachings on the mindfulness of breathing, it says to be aware, and teachings on mindfulness, inwardly and outwardly, to be aware of your own breath, but to be aware of how life is breathing itself. And then there comes wisdom, then there comes opening, and there comes something really tender and important. Then there comes love, because you're present in a different way to your breath, or the person next to you, or the world that's around you, or the breathing of the earth itself. And somehow that's what's really needed desperately in these times, because the earth has basically got a problem with secondhand smoke, right? And it's the burning of the forests in Sumatra and Borneo and the Amazon and so forth, and the boreal forests and, you know, subarctic, but it's also the release of enormous amounts of pollutants from the cars and the factories and so forth. And the earth, you see the earth breathing, but it's having, actually, it's COPD or whatever, it's having some trouble. And so our breath links us also to the breathing of all that lives. And it brings, when we do it right, connection and a sense of freedom in ourselves. And then the natural thing is to say, we are in this together. Let us pay attention, let us do what we can, so that the earth can breathe, that we can breathe with others in a way that brings wisdom, and really that brings connection and love. Arundhati Roy, she writes, great activist and novelist and all those many things. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. And there's something mysterious when we pay attention that wants to renew itself. The body wants to open, the heart wants to open, the mind wants to open if we bring attention to it with kindness, with loving awareness through our breath and our mindfulness. And that's really why we sit, to open to a kind of renewal and liberation and freedom of heart for ourselves, and then for the garden in which we live.
Thank you, Jess.
You're welcome.
So at this point in our morning, we open up for some conversation about your practice, your insights. Doesn't have to be about what you've heard. It can be just what's coming up in your life or your practice, or any questions you have about how to practice and how to do the things that we're talking about doing. Please just raise your hand and we'll bring the mic over to somebody there, and then Jordan. Yeah.
Hi. I always ask questions. It's like my favorite thing to do. So I've been dealing a lot with my father's. My dad had a stroke in October. And so I've been visiting him and just sort of realizing that, like, we're all kind of versions of people. That's been my latest feeling, that it's like a operating system, getting increasingly better as time moves along, and then things like strokes kind of take you from, like, suddenly you were running OS X and now you're running OS 8.1. and so just like learning how to deal with loss and suffering and just those noble truths of life, and just kind of, and so it's been powerful to deal with it. And I was like, oh, I'm really mastering this, mindfully and grieving, and then something happened in my career last week, which is of such a different world. It's this egoic world of success and other crap that's not about mortality and not about these deeper, more important things. And my first reaction, I had this kind of loss happen in my career, where it was like, oh, this thing I've been working on for 2 years is like, oh, not gonna happen. Oh, okay. And my first reaction was like, this weird reaction, like, it didn't bother me at all. And for about 3 or 4 hours, I'm like, am I in denial or what? Like, I don't give a shit. And then over the last 24 hours, a more familiar set of feelings have sunk in related to the egoic mind. And so I'm just kind of like wondering why it is that these architectures of meritocracy or career achievement continue to haunt you, even in the face of these bigger realizations about life. Like, I'm like, wait a minute, I graduated away from feeling suffering about this bullshit, and now I'm suffering about this bullshit that I know very deeply I should not be suffering about. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. We have all had those clearings, like those few hours you had of total equanimity and realizing it's okay. This, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't even matter that much. But then there's the other side. I did work for 2 years on this project, giving it all my creativity and my love and my time, and so it kind of does matter. And I don't know that it's all ego and pride. Some of it may be genuinely that you poured a lot of yourself into it, whatever it was. And so if it's not going to, be born and see the light of day in the way that it was intended to, that's sad. That is a loss. So it may be that you're kind of calling yourself names, that, oh, this is just my ego and this is just my concerns about my career, when it might be something a little bit closer to your heart, actually, of just needing a little bit of self-compassion. Like, that's hard when you've given 2 years of your life to somebody or something that mattered because you were doing it, and you really were pouring your creativity and your love into it, and working with yourself around the obstacles that would come up as you did it, right? So it was a practice for you as well as a job, and you used it well. So it may just be that you need a little bit of a reframe around what is going on with your feelings, because really both sets of feelings are true. It really doesn't matter in the great scheme of your life. And it matters because it was something you loved and did for 2 whole years, right? You wanted it to happen. Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to just share a couple of things. Jack, when you were talking about the resistance and growing, an image that I love, because nature's like my main teacher, is the story, which I'm sure you know, of the butterfly that is struggling to get out of the cocoon, and they've done, and someone was watching that and helped it and cut it open, and then that butterfly didn't develop the strength in the wings to fly. And another image, Trudy, when you were talking about Easter, I was born Jewish and studied in yeshiva for a while, and in my quest for spirit is that Easter for me, one of the reasons I love Easter is because I go, Jesus, I see it as a metaphor, but that he wasn't determined by the circumstances of life. And that's what inspires me about Easter, that I don't have to be determined by the circumstances of life either. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Clark, yeah, you can see.
Hi, so good to see you both. Jordan, is it? When you were speaking, for me it's about learning to let go. This is your livelihood. I know when I have put my heart and soul into something and it hasn't reached what I was hoping it reached. It's that whole thing about equanimity and letting go. And when I was on the East Coast, I studied with Beth Roth, who Jack, I know you know, and she compared equanimity to a mountain. And it gets the freezing snow on it, and it gets the hail, and it gets the burning sun, and it gets the rain, and it still stands there really solid. And I think about equanimity, I think that's nothing like me. I mean, that is really difficult. But that's kind of my image, and along with that, about, living your life and letting go. In these past several months, I had a dear friend who had a stroke. My brother passed, and I had a dear friend who passed away. And, a part of me says, yes, this is life and living my life, and yet it's so difficult to walk through that, although you're not alone, and other people are going through it as well. So I keep going back to this symbol of equanimity, of just, riding with it, and that keep breathing, Michelle, and it's gonna be okay, and that's what I try to impart to my clients. And last but not least, I have 3 movies that I have to recommend. The Mustang, which I think I talked about and blew me away, and then Amazing Grace. It's a doc on Aretha, and it's unbelievable. And then last night I saw this brilliant Chinese film called The Long Day's Journey into Night, and it was mystical and magical, and I have no idea what I saw. So if anyone sees it, find me.
Is that the Beth Roth who did all the parenting stuff?
I don't know. Jack, did she do parenting stuff? That I'm not aware of.
She has done some parenting training.
Okay.
Yeah.
And she's pretty amazing.
Thank you for this coming together. It's beautiful. But
Remind me your name.
my name's Lauren.
Lauren.
I've been practicing for 24 years, and specifically in Vipassana and this meditation. And I spent 15 years renounced and was totally in the present moment. And then the last 2 years I've been reintegrating. And there's one thing that's in the present moment that stays open, and the personality, your person is open and to changing and facing other people, and we have our actions and reactions to each other, but you're in the moment, you're addressing the substance of that moment with this person. But in the integrating process, noticing how people project person and have the story of person into the future, and they expect the person to be other than what they are. And when you're totally in the present moment and you're accepting of all those things, you start to become very accepting of your own person and its reactivities and whatever the personality that you were born with and the genetics that you came to. But when it's constantly coming back to you that your personality should be different, then it becomes isolating over time when you go, oh, but this is just another moment of, this is a moment, let's be in this moment. And that's probably why I'm reaching out to being here in communities, because I find it's often isolating in this in the culture and time and place where personality is so placed, the individual personality is placed so much importance, and and then we hold on to it as that's the only thing I have to hold on to. I mean, that isolating of going, oh, well, this is just, when you're addressing someone who's reacting to you and you say, oh, you're just this moment of a personality. I'm not saying this is all of you. This is this moment, let's look at that. And it's always, we paint the story, this is all of you. I mean, I'm always this way in this moment. The personality in this moment is saying, creates the story that it's always that way, or it's always going to be that way. Yeah, and then we do it with each other too. And I constantly find myself isolating from wanting to pull back into renunciation when I come around it at all angles.
Where were you practicing all those years?
I was on my own path. I mean, I started with Cuenca and doing retreats, but then I I was on the East Coast and just doing it on my own. I had a spiritual mentor that kind of guided me, but he was even encouraging me, no, don't follow anybody. And I also spent 4 years out of the country, 2.5 years renounced of money.
I'll let the person who spent more time being renounced.
But no longer dear.
That's for sure.
Happily. Happily married, yes. Anyway, Ramdas, who has such great wit, and we were just with him and visiting him. But he said, notably at one point, he said, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. And there's something really pithy about that, because this is a very concrete example of what you're saying, because you can have changed yourself or be very accomplished, but you come home and they still see you as the schlumpf that you were, before, or whatever ideas they had of you as and you're faced with that you're seen that way. So then the question is, what do you do with that, which is really what you're talking about. You can resist and say, I'm not that, and try and show them. They're generally not that interested, basically. They like to live in their, right? You can walk away, and I'm not going to pay attention to my family, but even the Buddha eventually went back and made a deal with his ex-wife and, his son and things like that. Apparently, you do have to go back. Or you can say, oh yeah, isn't that interesting? And you can have some sense of humor about it. They're really in the personality thing, aren't they? Well, yeah, and I have a personality that what they see you as, there's some truth in it. They think you're weird, and you are. But they are too, so it's sort of shared. So in some way, the ability to have that sense of humor and kindness and say, as you said, this is just personality. Some people are living much more in that. And in it, there's a certain suffering, so it takes compassion, really, And I remember, I think of this friend of mine who'd been a nun in Burma for quite a while and came back. And she said, I just hate going back to my family in Baltimore. I stayed there for a month. They watch TV, they drink. It was so the opposite, and how do I do it? And I said, well, you went for too long. I said, go for 3 days, have a couple beers, watch a football game, love them, and get the hell out of there.
Hi. It's so nice to have you back. So in meditating this morning, I felt good, and I sat down, and all was good. And then there was this gentle anxiety that I wasn't aware of. And then I spent a lot of the time either, I was trying to sprinkle joy on top of it, but it wasn't having it. And I was sprinkling, and it was really, I'm just fighting it and back and forth. And am I supposed to be like going into it and exploring it? No, I'm not doing that. All right, I'm just supposed to sit here and really be joyful. And that's not working either. And so, I guess, I don't even know exactly what the question is, other than is it just about noticing it? Or is there more to be done?
Well, it feels like you did it in this question, actually. You laughed at yourself. And you realized, I'm trying to sprinkle joy on this thing that is just like, I don't know, it's like trying to sprinkle powdered sugar on something wet. It's just not going to stick. And then you sort of saw the absurdity of it. I'm just sitting here trying to make something happen that isn't happening. And is that what I'm supposed to be doing? Or am I just supposed to notice that? Well, you actually noticed it. In your question was really a very mindful description of what you were going through.
I don't like it. I want to get rid of it too, but I hear what you're saying, yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point that out. Go ahead, Jack.
So
Go ahead,
close
dear.
your eyes for a second. Just where you are, keep the mic there, that's right. And be with the not liking and the description and the dialogue with Trudy and so forth. And as you do, without trying to change anything at all, put a little tiny half smile on your lips, like all this stuff held with that little bit of a half smile. And just see what that does, how that feels. And what do you notice?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I feel a little more joyful already, but it's easier, like, Jack, if you could just be there at every moment.
Yeah, we meditate together. It's like Annie Lamont, my dear friend, writes, my mind is like a bad neighborhood. I try not to go there alone. But it's a training wheels, we do it with one another and it helps. And then you do it. But what you did, what Trudy said, you were already tracking it beautifully, except that there was some idea that the way it wasn't supposed to be there. And then when you did that, you added the half smile, and you got some humor came out of you as well. It's like, okay, this is how it is, and that was perfect.
I think it comes back to Lauren's point too, that this is a moment. This is a mind moment. It's not going to be that way the next moment. Probably wasn't that way before, but we fixate our idea of, now I'm really anxious, now I'm trying to paste a smiley face on top of it, now that isn't working. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, it's just a flow of moments. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, all the way in back.
Thank you for being here. In relation to the event you had with Peter Levine,
Oh yes.
when you face something that really hurts, okay, maybe it's too much, and so with his technique is like you move to something else that you feel more strong with or empower it with, and then you rest in it and you go back to that place, back and forth. So I just kind of wondered what's your take on it, because I know mindfulness is more like you go into that place, you notice the place that is more alive, and you stay with it, right? So I'm just wondering how is that connecting to this?
Yeah, so what's beautiful is that you're trusting yourself. And what he was talking about is, for some kinds of trauma, when we get overwhelmed. And that to be overwhelmed for a lot of people is not necessarily that helpful. if they have, as you described, that capacity, I'm going to go in it and I can go through it, beautiful. If you're able to do that and not get lost and overwhelmed. But sometimes things get really hard, whether it's anxiety and fear or the reliving of things that were traumatic. And then what Peter is suggesting is that you find some strength and well-being through an image in your body, wherever you find it, and then little by little go and unlayer it, let a little of that show itself, and then come back to well-being. Much as you would in the mindfulness of breathing, you establish a place with that half smile and that spaciousness, and then the anxiety comes and the difficulty comes, and you have a place to rest that can hold it. What's beautiful, as I said, and what you described, is that you're trusting yourself, and there isn't like a cookie cutter way to do it. Rather, you have to listen to what helps you open, and it sounds like you're finding your way very well. I mean, as well as a human being can do, you know, given all our limitations. How's that sound?
Thank you.
Thank you for your teachings this morning, and I'm really glad to see you both here as well. I think I've been practicing for about 4 years now, and I can say that from this perspective, the fruit of my practice is really the sense of openness, the sense of wonder, and also that I know that if I sort of have a difficulty or if I'm to get too caught up with things, that I can always come back to this practice. And then it's not something that I sort of have to be super religious about, but that I have to be open about it. So in that sense, I finally booked yesterday. I was a little sort of, okay, how do I do this? But a retreat in Escondido with Thich Nhat Hanh tradition. I went to Blue Cliff in upstate New York about 3 years ago. It was absolutely amazing. I don't know if there is such a thing as an awakening. I think I kind of had a little bit of a taste there. So yeah, really looking forward to it. And so yeah, I just wanted to share that that sense of wonder to me is very important, because before that it was more like kind of, okay, I'm into secular humanism and into science. I still am, of course, but there's so much that we don't know, I feel like, and unless we keep our minds open and our hearts open, we'll never get there.
Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. Yeah.
Are we on? Yeah. Thank you for a special gift this morning to the both of you. It feels better to smile. And it's about music and the plants at MIT, all growing and happy in the presence of resisting the beat and working with the music. My darling Erwin is end-stage dementia. That's my husband. And life is pretty tough. And the equanimity of feeling the grief and the joy of sorrow and death is very much on my front burner. And I must say that the music is saving me, because we have music on in the house almost all day. Our project with Music Men's Minds is saving the lives of thousands of sufferers right now, seniors with Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's. And to have the gift of music, to be able to share with everybody, is saving all of us. And I can see down the road, as the guest, death, comes knocking at my door, that I'm going to be able to use music to dance right over the threshold into another world. And all of what I am learning here, I am so deeply grateful. because the meaning of life is so precious, and it's joy and sorrow. And I'm learning how to put it together right here.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. So let's sit for a moment together. And this is traditional at the end of a period of study and practice together that we do. It's called sometimes dedicating the merit. So as we sit together, we just reflect for a moment on anything that has been beneficial about this time. The chance to meditate, to listen to teachings, to listen to each other, to be just a little less lonesome in our practice. We come together, it's like a celebration of our daily alone practice, to practice with other people. Whatever it may be, we express our appreciation and gratitude by offering the goodness of our practice. Just offering it up, giving it away, whatever it may be, offering to all beings everywhere, without exception. And may the goodness of this practice help us, help all beings everywhere wake up and be with the reality of this life, this changing, fleeting life, with some tenderness, compassion for ourselves and each other and our world. So I want to thank you, everybody, for coming to practice together, and I want to thank our live stream friends who are here with us, and to remind you that you have on your screen a donate button. And I mention the donate button because, you know, Inside LA survives on a combination of our program fees and your generosity and philanthropy. That's how we make it. And of course, the bulk of our budget comes from our program fees. But we offer lots of sitting groups like this, which are just by donation and offered very freely from the heart. And so those of you who are in a position to support the teachings and the teachers and help out, we deeply appreciate it. And this is like our morning alms round with our begging bowls. And the bowl is out there. You really can't miss it as you leave. I usually encourage you to just empty your whole wallet into it, and then you leave a lot lighter in every way, physically and spiritually. But whatever you can offer and give through your donate button, your wallet, whatever it is, we are very grateful and look forward to seeing you next week. I do want to announce that we have for the first time, we're really excited, we have a 1-month retreat coming up in the summer. And you can sign up for 2 weeks of it. You know, there's 2 segments. We have a wonderful team of teachers, and Jack and I will be there, not there at the retreat, but guiding the teachers. And we're really excited to have this partnership with Big Bear Retreat Center, which is a new retreat center in Big Bear. And Bill Resnick had this dream of very, very powerful and amazing vision to have our own Southern California retreat center. The retreat center that Jack started at Spirit Rock is very beautiful and wonderful and always full. You have to get on lotteries to get into the retreats. So there's a real need for this retreat center, and we're really blessed to be working hand in hand with Bill and his team to create the retreats for the center. And in 2020, we're going to have, I think, something like 20 insight meditation retreats of all lengths, all sizes. You can choose, what would what will work for you, but I think this will really sustain and help all of our practice together. So I'll see you next week. So happy to say that.